I think one of the reasons why Boise State is who they are today, why Boise State is Boise State, was because they had access to the same group of games that everybody else had access to. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the newly renovated College Underdogs YouTube channel. Yes! Ready for another season. If you've been following me since day one, this will be year 4. This is the beginning of year 4. Year 2, covering the College Underdogs. Last summer, I know a lot of you was when you found this channel. There was a tremendous amount of growth over last summer and fall, and some of you have been wondering, where the heck have you been all winter and spring? I'll get into all that at some point, but right now I want to get to what I'm trying to get to. So I want to look at this Josh Pate clip along with the quote said by Sonny Dykes, the TCU head coach. Obviously, Josh Pate is the college football, podcaster, broadcaster over with CBS and the 24/7 Sports. Just some things. This is from earlier this spring, and that's kind of how I'm going to sort of get back into this new season, is hit some of the storylines from the winter and spring that are still relevant now, sort of give my reaction and give my 2 cents. You will notice, those of you especially that are fans of the American Athletic Conference, I really feel like right now is a time for any voice that advocates for G5 football needs to be unified, more unified now more than ever. If you remember the last video I left you with at the end of the last football season of the 2023 season was talking about if separation is inevitable. That is a conversation we're going to continue with throughout the summer as we get ready for the fall season. But today I want to look at a couple clips from Josh Pate, I don't know, a month or so ago, talking about how the G5 needs to have their own playoff. And so that's what today we're going to get into, because I've got some thoughts on this on both sides of the coin, and I would love to get your thoughts in the comments. If you are new to the channel, welcome. If you're a G5 football fan, this is the place to be, man. I would strongly encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. So let's jump into this first Pate clip.
Many of you have watched this show for a long time, and you know that there are a few drums that I have banged relentlessly. One of them has been, why don't we have a G5 playoff? That has always seemed like common sense to me. I've always thought it was one of the most mind-numbingly ignorant concepts imaginable to pretend that South Alabama is playing the same sport as the University of Alabama. But that's what we were forced to swallow as logic. And South Alabama is chasing the same championship, theoretically, that the University of Alabama is. Georgia State should have a shot at the same championship the University of Georgia is competing for.
And then also I want to show you the quote that Sonny Dykes had said earlier this spring. You see it here on the screen. I think we'll eventually split into separate divisions. Alabama and Louisiana Tech aren't playing the same sport. What I don't like about the argument they're making is that the extreme they're using, meaning, why does it have to be South Alabama and Alabama that aren't playing the same sport? Why does it have to be Louisiana Tech and Bama? Why does it have to be Georgia Southern and Georgia, right? Like, we're taking two teams from the Power Four that nobody's on the same playing field with. If we really want to be honest, at least for the last 5-10 years, Bama the last decade and a half, Georgia really the last 5 to 7 years. Okay, and we're pairing them up with just a random G5 team who's never been in a BCS conversation, never been in a New Year's Six conversation. Let's just go find the random G5 team that we can pair up with these elite teams. And I think for me, the other side of that argument is, if we're going to compare Bama and Louisiana Tech, then on your side to make an argument for separation, then on my side that wants to argue against separation is I'm going to say, okay, well, what about Memphis and Vanderbilt? What about, are they not playing for the same trophy? What about Tulane and Mississippi State? What about Boise State and Indiana? What about JMU and Virginia? What about App State and Wake Forest? What about Fresno State and BYU? Wyoming and Cal? I mean, like those right there are pretty comparable matchups, yet one is considered a power conference team and the other is not. And I know we could sit here and go through all the different G5, Power 5 matchups where the G5 came out on top. So I'm not like disagreeing though with what Josh Pate is saying. Like I understand the point that he's making is in the end, we can keep a spot open for these guys, but one, is it really deserved? And two, do they really stand a chance? I don't really come from the vantage point. I'll get to that in a second because there's another Pate clip I want to show. In fact, I'll show it right now.
Instead of pretending 130 some odd teams are playing the same sport, why have we not long ago acknowledged that you got the SEC and the power whatever conferences you want to call them, and it's fair enough. Yeah, there's a gulf between Washington State and Florida, but at least we can somewhat accept they're chasing the same trophy. But man, past that, why are we trying to shoehorn and carve out specialization to make sure we have inclusion in this playoff for teams that have no shot at winning the whole thing and don't play a strength of schedule that's anywhere remotely comparable to what some of the big boys do? And instead, why haven't we just built a separate playoff for these teams here? And I was always told, Josh, that's not fair. What's not fair?
So my argument is actually not that it's not fair. For me, my argument is that it's not what's best for college football as a whole. And I'll speak more to that here in just a second. But I want to address what he just said about Washington State, Florida. You know, he acknowledges, sure, there's a gulf between Washington State and Florida, but I think his exact quote was, but we can at least accept that they're chasing the same trophy. Here's what frustrates me about this, is that the same argument you're making against all these G5 conferences and schools, it's almost like you're contradicting yourself by not lumping a program like Washington State into that same argument. Meaning, to me, Washington State has just as much of a chance against the Alabamas and Georgias as Tulane and Memphis, in my opinion. And even if we look at Sonny Dykes' quote, which I thought was so ironic, considering that when his team made an underdog run all the way to the national title just a couple of years ago, what happened when they ran into Georgia? They weren't playing the same sport. What? They had that first good opening drive and then gave up a 60-piece or whatever it was. And I'm not trying to dunk on Wazoo here, but just to provide some facts to this conversation as it pertains specifically to Washington State, since he said, hey, yeah, there's a gulf between them and Florida, but we can accept they're playing for the same trophy. In the last 10 years, Washington State has 8 G5/FCS losses. Okay, and some of these were during seasons when they won 8 or 9 games. So it wasn't like they just had a bad year. It was good seasons relative to Washington State. They lost to Fresno State, Utah State, Central Michigan, Air Force, Eastern Washington, Boise State, Portland State, and Nevada. And so for me to sit here and say that the gulf between Florida and Washington State is smaller than the gulf between Florida and Tulane or Florida and Boise, I disagree with that. That's the part that I disagree with. I'm not disagreeing with what he's saying overall. And I'm not one of the ones that says, oh, you got to let them in because it's not fair. My argument for keeping access for the G5 to the CFP is because in any competition, in any bracket, playoff, fight, whatever, when you have an underdog that is in the mix, it always makes it more interesting, engaging, and it's better for fans. And I think right now, what you would be doing to the G5 by leaving them out of the CFP and having them have their own playoff is you're essentially stripping them from any interest from the general broader audience outside of, alum and fans of those specific teams. And my fear is, and I want to ask a question about this in just a second, but my fear is, okay, if you give the G5 their own playoff setup, who's to say they don't just it becomes the new version of what the FCS playoff is now, where there's not really a lot of broader fan interest in that. There's not a lot of engagement to that. Whereas I think you have even people who aren't like G5 football fans, they keep tabs on Group of Five football throughout the season, knowing that, hey, there's always, at least up to now, there's always been this race as to who's going to get that New Year's Six bid. Prior to that, a BCS bid, whereas now it'll be a playoff bid. And I'm also not so sure that on any given year, that fifth seed, or it wouldn't be the fifth seed, it would be the fifth conference champion in. They would probably make them the 12 seed, knowing how the committee operates. But I'm not so sure you're not going to have some seasons here and there where you see some first round wins from that G5 representative. So bottom line for me is, like, why am I against the split? Well, as I've already said, underdogs make any tournament or whatever more interesting. Okay, and then my second reason is, as I mentioned, is that I think it would significantly destroy the relevancy to the fans and the broader audience. I think one of the reasons why Boise State is who they are today, why Boise State is Boise State, was because they upset OU a decade and a half ago in the Fiesta Bowl in phenomenal fashion, right? The Statue of Liberty, the hook and ladder, all of that. And then they went on to win other BCS games, and now they have this brand that they have because they had access to, this same group of games that everybody else had access to. And when they got their opportunity, when they got their moment, they seized it. All right? Just like Tulane a few years ago, or a couple years ago, upsetting USC and the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback in the Cotton Bowl. I get it. Last year, Liberty got destroyed by Oregon. Okay, but I don't feel like that's going to happen every single year. The bottom line is, I really believe it's not about what's fair and what's not fair. To me, it's about what's best for college football, what's best for the fans, what's best for the overall engagement and growth of the game. And to me, it's allowing the underdogs to keep a seat at the table. And in my opinion, the argument you're using against them being able to be at the table, being able to have a seat at the table, like, you could make that argument for a lot of other teams who are considered power conference teams right now. That's my only point. So here's the last thing I want to bring up. What if there is a split? Like, what if there was a split? I said one of my reasons against it is because I think it would destroy the relevancy to fans and the broader audience, and would just kind of really damage the significance of Group of Five football as a whole. But let's look at this bracket real quick. I'm going to pull a bracket up for you. So don't read too much into this, right? I just created this kind of, some based off last year and then some based off what I think could potentially happen this upcoming season. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Could this bracket hold water with the broader audience of fans? You got App State and Colorado State, USF and Air Force, Liberty, Tulane in there. You got Boise, Miami, Ohio. You got Troy versus Memphis. I mean, is this a bracket? If this were to be the G5 college football playoff for the national championship, and I did a video last fall about what that new division could be. We had the FCS, FBS, and I had one for, I think, FAS. But let's just say this was the model. Could this keep fan interest? Or would this bracket that we're looking at right now just become the new glorified FCS playoff that nobody really cares about outside of, these teams and then just general G5 football fans? All right, it's good to be back. You'll be seeing more of me this summer and into the fall. I'll also kind of talk to you about the try to talk more about the changes. But if you've got some topics you'd like me to respond to or you want to hear my take on, please drop those in the comments. And also, everything is exclusively on YouTube now. I am going to be 100%. Everything College Underdogs will be exclusively all on YouTube. So if you want to hear my content, this is where you got to come. No longer on Spotify or Apple Pods for the time being. So everything is on YouTube. Going to house it all in one location, and we'll see what happens between now and the football season and see if something changes that. But otherwise, that's it for me today. Trey Smith, College Underdogs.